Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you all for participating and your interest. Thank you to Sanita and Sandy and Ethnic Media Services for hosting this. It comes at a very important time. So my name is John Yang. I am the President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. For the Chinese audience, my Chinese name is Yang Zhongyuan, so 孔子的任重道远, to help you in your translations. Let me tell you a little bit about my organization first, and then to give a little bit of background on what we're facing today. So Advancing Justice, AAJC's mission is to advance—
Mr. Yang, I'm so sorry. Could you speak a little slowly because we have 3 interpreters on the call?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. Thank you. Yes. My organization, Advancing Justice, AAJC's mission is to advance the civil and human rights of Asian Americans and to promote a fair and equitable society for all. So we are part of a group of 5 independent affiliates located for me here in DC, as well as affiliates in Atlanta, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. We also work through a network of community partners throughout the country, located in 34 different states, as well as the District of Columbia. These are over 160 grassroots organizations that really we work with to provide information to them, and they provide information to us here in DC as to the issues that are important to the Asian American community. I think to set the tone for what we are talking about today, first, the title is very apt to talk about this as the other virus, the other contagion that we are seeing. And I actually suspect within this context of ethnic reporters, you already know many of the issues that we are talking about, this hate that we are seeing. And the bottom line message first is that words matter. Words matter in causing issues, causing fear, causing physical harm to the Asian American community. Manju will talk in much more detail about the statistics. Their organization has done a wonderful job in compiling statistics on hate incidents and what we're seeing throughout the country. Neil is going to talk about some of the polling data that he has seen with respect to how the communities are feeling about this particular moment. And I believe Mike German from the Brennan Center will talk a little bit about the white violent extremism that we're facing right now. But to give you a little bit of background, on one level, this is not a new issue. If you think about the history of Asian Americans, i.e. Asians in the United States, this is something that we've always faced, and it's actually something that we've had to toggle between. On one level, our community has always been called at the so-called model minority, the community that sort of excels or overrepresents in STEM, but that is then used as our community as a wedge against other races, the Black community, the Latino community, to show that America is somehow in a post-racial society. Obviously, that is not true, and all of us are facing racism. What it means for the Asian American community is that the other aspect of this, which is what is often called the yellow peril, and that goes back a long way. Whether we are talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, after Chinese helped to build the Transcontinental Railroad, whether we are talking about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II on so-called suspicions of national loyalty, or whether we are talking about post 9/11, where the Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, South Asian community were targeted, profiled, and the subjects of violence as a result of the terrorist threat that was being presented to the United States. So this notion of Asian Americans and national security, or Asian Americans and disease, it is not a new one. And in fact, right now, we are facing, in some ways, at least a double whammy. There is COVID-19 that is driving fear in all of our communities, not just the Asian American community, all of our communities. And that fear causes a certain level of emotions. But then number 2 is the real geopolitical discussions that are happening, the tensions between the United States and China. It is absolutely correct to say that the Chinese government is doing some awful things. Whether we are talking about Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region, whether we are talking about free press in Hong Kong, or just a general surveillance state that exists in mainland China, there are legitimate disputes between the Chinese government and the United States government. But what we don't want is all of that to bleed over into the Chinese American society or the Asian American society writ large. And that is what we see happening. is when the president uses words like Chinese virus, Kung flu, and most recently at the presidential debate, China plague. That has a ripple effect, a real direct effect on all Asian Americans, not just Chinese Americans, all Asian Americans here in the country. What we have seen, our organization likewise has a website that tracks hate incidents, that allows people to tell stories about hate incidents that they have encountered. What we have seen is that language has translated into actions by certain individuals, actions in the form of racist incidents, epithets, and outright violence at times. In fact, the ADL just put out a report, ADL being the Anti-Defamation League. They just put out a report this morning tracking online hate and showing spikes in online hate directed at Asian Americans after the president used the term China plague, and when other high-ranking officials have used these types of derogatory terms. And as Sandy mentioned, these have real-world consequences. It has real-world consequences on our Asian community, but it also has real-world consequences in terms of the violent extremism that we are seeing. Our organization is nonpartisan, but we have to call out language that is being used. The fact that language that was used to say, liberate Michigan, and to ask people to stand guard against the Michigan state government has resulted in real violence, potential violence, death threats against the Michigan governor. And so we have to recognize all of that. So when I say have to recognize, the other sort of backdrop I would give is, well, what is it that communities can do about all of this? On one level is precisely what we're doing here today, which is talking to all of you, talking to the general public, talking to policymakers, influence makers about the real dangers that this is. This is not about word semantics. This is not about political correctness. This is about real life consequences that happen as a result of this language, this fear that we are seeing. There are certainly policy issues that we could present, such as the Jabera Hire No Hate Act that Congress is trying to get passed right now, that offers some additional tools to how we can respond to hate. There are policies that state and local governments can offer, essentially to provide victim services, among other things. Those are also...
My question, as an Arab American and Muslim, we are faced racism and discrimination from U.S. President Trump when he put the ban bill for against the 8 Arab country, Muslim country, for also the American Muslim citizen to enter the United States, and even they put a lot of restriction for the Muslim on United States. My question is, we know that our president, he is racism, and he is always has discrimination case when he talk about all the ethnic we know that 100%. But
ask your question, Fatma.
Yeah, the thing is, why the Congress and the House of Representatives and all the official and they cannot take action against what the president did, because it's built hate between each other, between American and the ethnic. That my question. Why the representative, the Congress take action about that? Everybody.
Yep. That's an excellent question. Unfortunately, we are in a time of what I would call extreme partisanship. And people...
variety of issues, including, of course, issues of racial discrimination, but also of civic engagement, environmental justice, health and healthcare access, and housing and economic development. So next slide. So early in 2020, we began to see the emergence of COVID-19 related hate against our communities. And I wanted to share with you 3 examples that are emblematic of what we saw in those first few months. That is really between sort of February and June of 2020. The first example on the left is elderly parents or grandparents who are walking their grandchild in the neighborhood when a group of 20 to 30-year-olds drove by and screamed racial epithets at them. Of course, they were nervous, upset, and anxious, and felt very unsafe. The middle example is a violation of civil rights law, which is a ride-hailing company refusing to pick up someone who is Asian American or Pacific Islander, and again, yelling racial and racist comments. And then the last example is one that we here in LA worked on, which was of a middle school child who was physically attacked and verbally assaulted, essentially for being Asian American. He was accused of having COVID-19 and by a bully at the school and told to go back to China. And so when the child responded that he was not Chinese, unfortunately, he was punched in the head 20 times by the bully. And no action was immediately taken during that time by the school administration. So these are just a few of the examples, next slide, that resulted in APCON getting together with Chinese for Affirmative Action and San Francisco State University, both in the Bay Area, to work on COVID-19 related hate against our communities. We launched a reporting center on March 19th of this year, and we found that right away we began to get literally hundreds of incident reports that were reported firsthand by individuals who had experienced them. We believe that came as a result of our being trusted sources in the AAPI community with over 100 years of experience combined. Our form is available in multiple languages. You see those here. So we make sure that even individuals who are limited English speaking can access our forms and report incidents that have happened to them. We've also done significant outreach to LEP communities and immigrant communities, and our reports are available on the APCON website, but we are slowly migrating all of them to our Stop AAPI Hate website, both of which you can access today. Next slide. So right away, we began collecting data with our researchers at SF State and now at many other universities. And so we found that in 29 weeks, we've received over 2,700 incident reports from across the country. As John mentioned, most of these that we've seen and other organizations have seen are hate incidents and not hate crimes. And that's really important for us to remember as we look at remedies and policy solutions. The incidents for us come from 45 states in the District of Columbia. 56% involve or come from the states of California and New York. Women experience hate at a rate 2.3 times that of men, and 7% of respondents are seniors. So what does this tell us? One, that these incidents are widespread. No part of the country is immune. But we know that, of course, significant percentage come from those places that have large populations of AAPIs. We also know that vulnerable community members are targeted. And so it's no surprise, understanding the Me Too movement, that women are experiencing much more hate and harassment than men, and that seniors also are being targeted. Next slide.